Hi there. I love shortcuts. If there's anything a little bit short or a quicker way of doing things or quicker way of understanding things, I just love that. Maybe I'm lazy, but I love those little things that help you to understand things nice and quick. And I've been thinking about some shortcuts to the message of the Bible. And I'll write you one here. This is my little summary of one of the Bible books. Let's just see what you think. Now the question is, which book of the Bible does that represent? Which book of the Bible is that? Which is the message of the book of the Bible of that? Have you got it? Okay. Be wise. Be wise. Be wise. So obviously that's the book of James. I'll do another one. There's another one. So that's a U crossed out. What do you think that is? No U-turns. So that'll be the book of Hebrews, which is all about not going back. So just a bit of fun, really. I wonder how you would make a summary of the book of Galatians. I've done one. I'll show it you at the end. Anyway, I'm Simon Baker, and I'm a member of the Threshold Church, and it's lovely to be with you and to share the word with you today. And today is Remembrance Sunday, and Remembrance Sunday, the day when we remember all those who fell in the two world wars, who fell defending the freedom of those of us who were fortunate enough to live on. They died for our freedom, and we're grateful to them. We're grateful that they died so that we could be free, and we could be free to determine who governs us, and we can be they died so that we can live as free men and women under that government that we have elected. But you know, there are other freedoms other than living under a government that you've elected freely. And what kind of freedoms can you think of? I wonder. You thinking of any freedoms? What can you think of? Freedom of speech, for example. Freedom to say what you actually believe and what you think. That's a pretty difficult one at the moment, I would say, in my opinion. Freedom to worship. That is, fortunately, we've still got that here. Or I know some people are a bit concerned about some of the recent rules about worship, but I think actually fundamentally we have freedom of worship. That's great. And then there's the freedom to socialize and to mix with one another, to be together. And we haven't even realized that was a freedom until we lost it. COVID ran off with it, ran down the street, screaming with it, our freedom in its hand. And in church, I guess that freedom from sin is something that we talk about as well. And maybe you can think of lots of other sorts of freedom that there might be. And in Galatians chapter 4, Paul, of course, is very concerned with freedom. That's his big thing in Galatians. Some Christians at that time wanted other Christians to adopt a kind of special set of rules or rituals or things that they did. And they said to them, look, these are the things that you've got to do if you want to be proper Christians, if you want to be real Christians, if you want to be hardcore, these are the rules for living. But they weren't actually, these rules they weren't actually rules that Jesus had given. They weren't the commands that Jesus had given. They weren't love your neighbor as yourself. They weren't love one another or love God or anything like that. They were the old Jewish rules. But I'm going too quickly. I'm getting away with myself. Let's start by reading a little bit of the chapter. So we're on Galatians chapter 4, and I'm going to be reading verses 1 to 7. Galatians chapter 4, verses 1 to 7, if you want to follow it. And the title is Sons and Heirs. Paul says, I mean that the heir, as long as he's a child, is no different from a slave. Though he's the owner of everything, but he's under guardians and managers until the date set by his father. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you're sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you're no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. And of course, son there stands for son or daughter. So Paul is talking here about the past. He says that before Jesus came, everyone was a slave to the principles of the world. Even if they actually were heirs of the world to come, they were in fact slaves under the law. And it was only when Jesus came, in the past, says Paul, it was only when Jesus came. So Paul says, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son. So then in the past, we were set free by Jesus. Freedom from all of this was given when Jesus came. So freedom we have in the past, but is it only in the past? Or have we got freedom in the present? Well, let's ask Paul. Let's skip on to verse 8 and 9. Chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. Formerly, says Paul, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. But now that you've come to know God, or rather be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? Paul says to the Galatians, look, you've come to know God himself, but now what you're doing is you're going back to all those rules and principles that you used to obey. Well, that's not right. You have freedom, says Paul, in the present. Don't sell yourself out to slavery again. That's crazy. This freedom is not just for then, for the past, but it's actually also for the present. Galatians, this is for your present, says Paul, for your now. You need to live, says Paul, now in the freedom that Jesus has given you. He gave it to you in the past. Now you have it, and now you need to go on living in it. Don't go back. Don't get the freedom from Jesus and then go back to the slavery, to all the other stuff. So this freedom, says Paul, is for the past, but it's also for the present. But is it, Paul? Is it for the future? Because it's all very well me having freedom in the past and in the present, but what about my future, Paul? We might say. Well, let's see what he says. He says, yes, indeed. He says, yes, indeed. And he comes up with this most curious story, actually. And the story is based on Abraham's two wives. And the question is, which is the real mother? It's a sort of spot the mum sort of explanation. Anyway, it's curious. Let's read it. It's Galatians 4, and now we're going to read 21 to 26. Tell me, says Paul, you who desire to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave woman and one by a free woman. But the son of the slave was born according to the flesh, while the son of the free woman was born according to the promise. Now, this may be interpreted allegorically. These women are like two covenants. One is from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. She's Hagar. Now, Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. She corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But, says Paul, the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother. Spot the mum. So it's a bit difficult to unravel, and you might want to sit down and read it through again. But Paul basically tells us that the two women represent two versions, if you like, of Jerusalem. One is the earthly version, which he sees as a slave version, slave to regulations and sin, and one is the heavenly version of Jerusalem, which is the free version. And we who belong to Jesus belong to the heavenly version, and we will have freedom. We do have it. We've had it in the past. We do have it now, and we will have it in the future, because our mother, says Paul, is the heavenly Jerusalem. Our real mother, says Paul, is the heavenly Jerusalem, not the place on earth, but the heavenly Jerusalem. So Paul says, we've got freedom in the past. Christ bought it for us. He says we've got freedom in the present, so don't go back. There's no need to. Live in the freedom. And he says we've got freedom in the future in the heavenly Jerusalem. A complete freedom, past, present, and future. That's what Paul says. That's what he's telling us. Okay, fantastic. Complete freedom. How wonderful. Past, present, and future freedom. But what sort of freedom is this that we've got? Maybe it's easier to say what it isn't. It isn't, what Paul's talking about isn't a freedom to determine who governs us, and it isn't a freedom to live as free men and women, citizens under the government. It's not the freedom won by many, many people in 2 world wars. That is precious, and it is important, no less now than it was 76 years ago, but it's not the freedom that Paul is actually talking about. So what was the freedom that Paul was talking about? Well, in Paul's day, he was talking mainly about freedom from rites and rituals, from particular ways of behaving, which were associated with Judaism at that time. Those are the people who were saying, this is the stuff you need to do to be proper Christians. These are the rites, the rituals, and the stuff that you need to do if you want to be a real hardcore Christian person. And Paul was saying, no. You have freedom, past, present, and future. Now, these rules, they're wanting them to obey. They weren't bad rules in themselves. They were rules which were designed not to make people sin or make people do wrong, but actually to stop people from doing wrong. But rules were never going to really work. Rules don't bring about good thinking. Rules don't bring about good conscience, and rules usually don't, to be honest, bring about even good actions. Rules are never going to change me on the inside, my intentions, my heart, my thinking. They stop me doing bad stuff and help me to see actually how really bad I am on the inside, that I actually want to even do that bad stuff. Tell someone not to do something, and that's the thing they want to do. Just ask anybody who's got a toddler. And they'll call that freedom. But that's not freedom. There's another kind of freedom, isn't there? Let's go back and look at the freedom that Jesus promised. I'm going to read from John chapter 8 and verse 34. Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever. If the Son sets you free, you are free indeed." So that's John chapter 8 and verse 34. True freedom then, true freedom is freedom from the weight of the things we've been doing wrong in the past. True freedom is to be able to do what is right in the present. True freedom is also to be in God's house forever, to be with Jesus forever. Jesus said, "The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever." And that is what God is promising us here. It's freedom from sin past, freedom to choose the right in the present, and it's the freedom to be with Jesus in his presence forever. And it only comes through Jesus. You can't get it any other way. I wonder what you need to be set free from. Why don't you pause for a moment and think, what's the single thing, sin if you like, the single thing that you most need setting free from, the thing that holds you back from being closer to Jesus, a closer walk with him. If you go down the supermarket aisle, you'll usually find a free from section. Free from egg, free from nuts, free from dairy. Let's go down a different aisle with Jesus and decide what we would like to be free from. If you can't think of anything at the moment, just spend some time later. Take some time alone and just worship him for a moment. Prayer, put a little bit of music on. Ask him what you need to be free from. And then listen carefully to what he says. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Let me say that again. So if the Son sets you free, if the Son sets you free, that's Jesus, the Son of God. If the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed, completely free. Not relatively free, not free from a few things, not free to do a few things, but free, completely free. That's what Jesus is offering, complete freedom, past, present, future. Not freedom to form a government, not freedom to live as a citizen, not freedom from rules and rituals. All that's in, but he's offering much more. He is offering that you should be free indeed. Why don't you set an alarm on your mobile phone? The verse is John 8:34. So if you put an alarm at 8:34, I've stolen this from Sarah, and I'm going to admit to that. But put that verse as the name on the alarm, and it'll come up at 8:34 every day and remind you that you are free indeed. If the Son sets you free, you can leave Babylon in the way we've been thinking about it recently. You can leave Babylon. You have been set free by Jesus. You know, I remember the first time that I experienced that sort of freedom in my own life. Bonds broken, habits I could never have dealt with, broken, never to hold me back in quite the same way. Many of us labour under habits and sins which hold us back. The good news of Jesus Christ is that he set us free. He is setting us free, and he will set us free. Free to honour and obey and to serve him forever. Free from sin and free for him. I promised to give you my summary of the book of Galatians, so I better do that now. Let me just find the paper. I wonder if any of you have got anything similar. There it is. Do you get that? You be free, or you could have you are free. You are free. So remember, Jesus has set us free. You're freed from the power of sin and freed to be with Jesus. So we're going to return again in a few moments with Marvin Joy to celebrate the many, many men and women who paid the price of their lives for our political freedom. And we can give thanks for them with a big heart. But as we celebrate another kind of freedom, which only one man, Jesus, bought for us, so that we could shake off the burden of sin, so that we could be with him forever. And we can shout a great hallelujah. Let's pray together. Jesus, we thank you for the freedom that you bought us. We thank you too for the freedom that we have in this country to elect a government, to live as citizens. But how much more, Jesus, is the freedom that you bought for us? Freedom in the past, freedom in the present, and freedom in the future, and freedom to be with you. Please take from us anything that's getting in the way of that freedom, and please help us in our hearts to worship you. Amen. God bless.